There is a city in Texas where the border isn't really a border in the way the rest of the country imagines it. It's a single metropolitan area split by a river, where El Paso and Ciudad Juarez have functioned for over a century less as two cities than as one city that happens to have an international boundary running through the middle of it. El Paso. Population 680,000, with another 1.5 million just across the Rio Grande and Juarez. The westernmost point of Texas, surrounded by the Chihuahuan Desert and the Franklin Mountains, where the food culture diverges so sharply from the Tex-Mex of Dallas or Austin that El Pasoans have their own running joke about it, and a popular meme to go with it. El Paso, where the border isn't a line, it's a kitchen. In the early 1950s, a teenager named Joe Mora was left in charge of feeding his younger siblings while his parents were away at work in El Paso's South Side. With limited resources and no real cooking background, he improvised, rolled corn tortillas stuffed with ground beef, fried until crisp, and doused in a thin, soupy tomato-based sauce, something between tomato soup and a watery hot sauce, to stretch a small amount of meat across a hungry household. That improvised childhood recipe became, on July 4, 1953, the founding menu item of Chico's Tacos, a walk-up stand Mora opened on Alameda Avenue while working his day jobs as a jukebox mechanic and boxing promoter. When skeptical customers told him the rolled, sauce-drenched tortillas weren't real tacos, Mora's answer became local legend. Right, they're Chico's tacos. The dish defies every category Texas Mexican food typically falls into. They're not Tex-Mex. They're not traditional Mexican. Food writers have argued they're technically closer to flautas or taquitos than actual tacos, served 3 to an order in a small paper boat, smothered in finely shredded cheese, and swimming in enough of that signature red sauce that eating them requires a plastic fork rather than your hands. A 2016 switch from the restaurant's longtime imitation cheese back to real cheddar caused a genuine local uproar, proof of how seriously El Pasoans take a dish most visitors initially find baffling. Mora died in 1992, and his children took over what had grown into a 5-location family-run operation now producing more than 15,000 tacos a day. Cash only. No franchising, no expansion outside city limits. In the late 2000s, an Austin restaurant called Chico's Tacos, the name differing from the original by a single letter, down to an identical paper boat and tomato-based sauce, drew a trademark lawsuit from the Mora family. Chico's went out of business before the case ever reached trial. In 1927, in the middle of Prohibition, Antonio and Juanita Flores opened a restaurant on the outskirts of El Paso called Tony's Place, one that, according to local history, supplemented its income with not-so-secret homebrew and slot machines that quietly defied the era's liquor laws. They built it directly across the street from Concordia Cemetery, the historic burial ground for several Old West gunslingers and lawmen, which earned the restaurant its enduring nickname, the Old Place by the Graveyard. In 1968, the Flore family's daughter and son-in-law, Lilia and John Duran, took over the restaurant and renamed it L&J Cafe. Leo and Francis Duran became the third generation to run it, and Leo was eventually inducted into the Texas Restaurant Association's Hall of Honor, only the 5th El Pasan in the organization's history to receive that distinction. Today, Vanessa Duran represents the 4th generation overseeing daily operations in a kitchen that has tripled in size and now employs more than 100 people. L&J's signature dish is caldillo, a green chili stew built from tender chunks of beef, potato, and roasted green chili strips, a dish that distills the entire Borderlands relationship with Hatch-style green chile into a single bowl. The restaurant's chile de árbol salsa proved so popular over the decades that it's now bottled and sold directly out of the restaurant's own gift shop. Caldillo is the dish that, more than any other, explains the difference between El Paso's relationship to Mexican food and the rest of Texas's. While most of Texas built its Tex-Mex identity around interior Mexican dishes adapted with American beef and cheese, El Paso sits close enough to southern New Mexico's chili-growing region that green chili itself became the area's defining ingredient, the way brisket defines Central Texas barbecue. A proper caldillo is a stew. Cubed beef, potatoes, tomatoes, onion, garlic, and, critically, roasted, peeled green chili strips, simmered together until the broth turns rich and slightly smoky from the chili. It's comfort food built for the desert's temperature swings, equally suited to a cold winter evening and the kind of dish a grandmother makes in bulk to feed an entire extended family on a Sunday. Nearly every multi-generational Mexican restaurant in El Paso, L&J Cafe foremost among them, treats caldillo as close to a signature dish, a built-in measure of whether a kitchen actually understands the borderland's specific way of cooking with chile. El Paso sits roughly 40 miles south of the Hatch Valley in southern New Mexico, a narrow agricultural strip along the Rio Grande, whose soil, elevation, and growing conditions produce what is widely considered, among chili farmers and food scientists alike, the finest green chili pepper grown in North America. Hatch chile isn't a single variety. It's a designation tied to the valley's specific growing region, encompassing several New Mexico chili cultivars harvested there each August and September. The roasting season transforms entire parking lots across the borderland, including in El Paso itself, into temporary open-air roasting operations, with propane-powered rotating drum roasters charring fresh chile by the bushel while customers wait. The smell of roasting chile drifting across entire neighborhoods for weeks every fall. El Paso's relationship to Hatch chile runs deeper than seasonal enthusiasm. The pepper appears in caldillo, in chile rellenos, in green chile chicken enchiladas, on burgers, folded into queso, and ladled directly over nearly anything a kitchen can justify topping with it. A chile relleno, a whole roasted poblano or Hatch green chili stuffed with cheese, battered in egg, and fried until golden, appears on nearly every traditional menu in El Paso. But the borderland version leans specifically into the same Hatch-adjacent chili culture that defines caldillo, distinguishing it from the milder poblano-based versions found in interior Mexican cooking or the rest of Texas. The dish requires a specific, somewhat finicky technique. The chili must be roasted and peeled without tearing, stuffed without losing its structural integrity, and battered in a way that produces a light, eggy crust rather than something heavy enough to overwhelm the pepper underneath. El Paso's older, multi-generational restaurants, L&J among them, treat a kitchen's chile relleno as a genuine test of competence, the borderland equivalent of judging a New Orleans restaurant by its gumbo. The burrito found in El Paso diverges noticeably from the burritos found in California or even in the rest of Texas, generally smaller, simpler, and built around a single filling rather than the elaborate, multi-ingredient construction that defines the California burrito tradition popularized further west. A classic El Paso burrito is typically a flour tortilla wrapped around shredded beef or chicken, beans, and a modest amount of cheese, served with green or red chili sauce ladled over the top rather than folded inside. Closer in spirit and construction to the burritos found across the border in Juarez and the broader Chihuahua region than to the heavily Americanized versions found in most of the rest of the United States. The dish reflects the same cross-border continuity that defines most of El Paso's food culture. A recipe that never really had to adapt to American tastes, because the population eating it on both sides of the river was, functionally, the same population. Menudo, a spicy stew built from beef tripe and red chili broth, traditionally served with hominy, lime, onion, and oregano, holds a specific cultural position in El Paso that goes beyond a simple regional dish. It's the borderland's defining weekend morning hangover cure, served almost exclusively on Saturdays and Sundays at restaurants across the city, L&J Cafe included. The dish's reputation as a restorative, slow-simmered cure for the previous night's excesses is taken seriously enough that some El Paso restaurants only put it on the menu those 2 days, understanding precisely when their customers are going to need it. Its preparation, tripe simmered for hours until tender, the broth built from dried red chilies, toasted and blended into a deep, rust-colored base, requires the kind of time investment that makes it impractical as a daily offering, reinforcing its status as a specifically weekend ritual rather than an everyday meal. Picadillo, a seasoned ground beef hash, often with potato, tomato, and onion, appears across El Paso's Tex-Mex menus as a taco filling that locals describe, almost universally, with some version of the same phrase, that it tastes like someone's mother made it personally, regardless of which restaurant's kitchen actually produced it. The dish's specific appeal in the borderland comes from how directly it mirrors home cooking rather than restaurant cooking. A simple, inexpensive ground beef preparation that almost every El Paso family makes some version of, which means a restaurant's picadillo taco is functioning less as an exotic specialty than as a direct echo of what's already on the home dinner table most nights of the week. El Paso's tamale culture runs on the same December rhythm, found across the broader Mexican-American Southwest. Families gathering for multi-day tamale-making sessions ahead of Christmas, assembling dozens or hundreds at a time from mesa, lard, and a filling typically built from red chili pork or, in the borderlands' specific variation, green chile and cheese, reflecting the area's hatch chile obsession. Local tamale shops across the city, Tamales Lupita, among the most frequently cited by El Pasoans as a non-negotiable holiday stop. See their longest lines of the entire year in the weeks before Christmas, when families place advance orders by the dozen rather than risk arriving to find the day's batch already sold out. The borderlands' specific tamale identity, leaning toward green chili fillings that wouldn't be nearly as dominant in tamale traditions further into the Texas interior, ties directly back to the same Hatch Valley influence that shapes nearly everything else on this list. El Paso's burger culture, at spots like Chico's Tacos itself, which sells burgers and hot dogs alongside its signature tacos, reflects a specifically borderland habit of treating American diner food and Mexican-American food as part of the same continuous menu rather than separate culinary categories that require separate restaurants. A Chico's Tacos. Hot dog, for instance, isn't a hot dog at all in any conventional sense. It's two sliced beef franks on a round hamburger-style bun, topped with chili, mustard, and pickles, an item that exists nowhere else in quite the same configuration. The willingness to blend, rename, and reconstruct standard American fast food into something specifically borderland runs through nearly every multi-generational restaurant in the city. A culinary instinct built from over a century of two cultures sharing a single metropolitan area divided only by a river.